This is the Dialog Manager. It coordinates all dialog system activity. By default, it runs as a persistent singleton, which means it survives scene changes and ensures only one instance exists at a time. The Dialog Manager has a lot of settings that you can use to customize the way the dialog system works. When you're working with a prefab that you haven't made completely from scratch, such as the Dialog Manager, a good practice is to make and use a prefab variant. This way, if you import an updated version of an asset, you won't lose your customizations, since the customizations are on the prefab variant and not the original prefab included in the asset. To make a prefab variant, right-click on the prefab and select Create Prefab Variant. Rename it and put it in your own folder. Then add this prefab variant to your scene. Since it's a singleton, you can add this prefab variant to any and all of your scenes, and it will take care of ensuring that only one exists at runtime. To learn about the Dialog Manager's settings, you can mouse over fields to read tooltips, or click the question mark to open the manual page. If you click the Dialog Manager link at the bottom of the page, you can get more detailed information about the Dialog Manager. On the Dialog Manager, you can assign a dialog UI, which is what dialog and alert messages appear in. We'll cover dialog UIs in a later series of videos. The Localization Settings section lets you configure language localization settings. The Subtitle Settings section is important to look at. It controls what types of lines of dialogue are shown and for how long. By default, subtitles, that is, lines of dialogue in your conversation tree, are shown for a duration determined by the text length and subtitle characters per second and min subtitle seconds. You can also require the player to click a Continue button to advance instead of automatically advancing. There are various settings for the Continue button mode. Camera and cutscene settings are also important to look at. The most relevant field to look at right now is the default sequence. This specifies the default commands that nodes in your conversation tree execute. The default value is delay end. This end is a special value that's based on the text length and the subtitle settings. This tells nodes in your conversation tree to delay for a certain duration before advancing to the next node in the conversation. The Input Settings section controls how player response menus work. A useful field to be aware of is Always Force Response Menu. This tells conversations to always show a menu of player response buttons, even if there's only one choice. If you want to show player lines as subtitles instead of response menus when there's only one choice, untick this checkbox and tick these checkboxes in subtitle settings. Bark settings control how barks or one-off lines of dialogue are displayed. Alert settings control how alert messages are displayed. We'll skip over the rest for now, except for Other Settings Debug Level. When you're tracking down an issue, it can be very useful to temporarily set debug level to info. This will log detailed dialog system activity to the console window. The Dialog Manager's Instantiate Prefabs component instantiates UI prefabs. You can change the list of prefabs that it instantiates. By default, it instantiates basic Selector UI, Quest Tracker HUD, and Quest Log Window UIs. The Input Device Manager component handles changes in input devices. The dialog system's UIs use it to determine when to ensure that some relevant UI button remains focused or selected so the player can navigate UI buttons with a gamepad or keyboard. If you always want to force UI buttons to be focused when applicable, tick Always Autofocus. Otherwise, if the Input Device Manager detects that you're using a mouse, it won't always autofocus. If you're using a framework asset that controls the mouse cursor, you may want to untick Control Cursor State. If the Dialog Manager's initial database field is unassigned, the Create button is a shortcut to create a new Dialog database. Click the Edit button or the Dialog System logo to open the Dialog database that's assigned to the initial database field. The next video will introduce the Dialog Editor. Thanks for watching.